Can I paint your bikes? For tips? The words hit the room like a stone dropped into still water. Every wrench stopped turning, every voice cut off mid-sentence. 240 men, leather, steel, and scar tissue turned at the same moment toward the open garage door, where an 18-year-old girl stood holding a worn sketchbook against her chest like a shield she didn't know she was carrying. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence had weight, and she didn't flinch once. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go. The summer that year came in hard and stayed hard. The kind of heat that pressed down on everything and made the air taste like hot asphalt and motor oil. The kind of heat that turned tempers short and made men say things they'd spend weeks walking back. The Hells Angels garage on the south end of Caldwell Street had been running full capacity since 6 in the morning. Bikes in various states of assembly lined up across every inch of the floor. Tools scattered music grinding low through a speaker system wired to the rafters with something that looked like it had been designed by a man who understood electricity the way a coyote understands traffic. It was the kind of place that had its own gravity. You didn't wander into it by accident. You didn't push open that door because you were curious. Every single man in that building had either earned his way through the front entrance or been brought in by someone who had. The chapter ran deep, 240 members between the full patches and the prospects, plus the handful of mechanics and regulars who existed in the comfortable orbit around the club without belonging to it outright. On a Wednesday afternoon in late July, most of them were present. So when the door opened without a knock and the light shifted and a girl walked in like she had an appointment, every single one of them felt it. She was young. That was the first thing. Not young in the way that bikers' daughters were young, road-worn eyes already carrying knowledge they hadn't asked for. Young in the way that meant she had not yet been broken by anything large enough to leave a visible mark. Blonde hair pulled back in a loose knot, jeans with paint stains on the right knee, a plain white t-shirt, canvas sneakers that had seen better days, and that sketchbook thick worn at the corners, the cover bent back in a way that said it had been opened and closed 10,000 times. She stood in the doorway for exactly 2 seconds, scanning the room with gray eyes that took everything in without broadcasting a single thing back, and then she walked forward into the noise and the heat and said the words that stopped everything. Can I paint your bikes? For tips. Jack Rourke heard it from the far end of the main bay where he'd been bent over a Sportster's rear brake assembly with a flashlight in his teeth and a socket wrench in his hand. He heard it straightened up slowly and turned. Jack was the road captain. He had held that position for 11 years, which meant he had seen every variety of person who believed they could walk into a Hells Angels garage and make some kind of transaction happen on their own terms. Salesmen, journalists, lawyers, a city councilman who once came in wearing a polo shirt and left considerably humbler than he arrived. He had seen confident people and foolish people, and occasionally people who were both at once, which was the most dangerous combination. He had never seen this. She was standing in the middle of the bay now, maybe 40 feet inside the door, and she hadn't stopped walking until she reached a natural open space between two bikes where she could be seen from most of the room. She wasn't performing. She wasn't smiling nervously or looking for a friendly face or doing any of the 10 things a person does when they've walked into a space they're not certain they belong in. She was simply standing there holding her sketchbook, waiting. "You lost," Jack said. His voice carried. It always did. Not because he shouted Jack Rourke almost never shouted, but because there was a particular register of authority that cut through ambient noise the way a clean note cuts through static. Everyone in range heard it. Everyone in range stopped whatever they were doing. The girl looked directly at him. "No," she said. "I'm exactly where I meant to be." Someone behind Jack made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a cough. He ignored it. "How old are you?" he asked. 18. "You got ID to back that up." She reached into the back pocket of her jeans and produced a driver's license without hesitation and held it out toward him. He crossed the floor to take it, looked at her, and handed it back. "Lena Carter," he said. The name meant nothing to him yet. "What makes you think we need our bikes painted?" "I didn't say you need it," she said. "I said I'd do it for tips. There's a difference." Another sound from the crowd. This one more distinctly a laugh. A few of the men were moving closer now, drawn by the fact that something unusual was happening. And unusual things in a place like this either ended in disaster or became stories you told for 20 years. The smart money usually bet on disaster. Jack crossed his arms. You walked into a private club, he said. No invitation, no introduction. You don't know a single person in this room. No, she agreed. And you're asking to put your hands on our bikes. Yes. Give me one reason I shouldn't walk you back out the way you came in. She opened her sketchbook. She didn't say anything when she did it. That was the thing that landed hardest in retrospect when the men who were there that afternoon talked about it later. She didn't lead with a pitch or an explanation or a single word of setup. She just opened the book and held it toward Jack Rourke at the angle that let him see it clearly, and the nearest 5 men who happened to be standing close enough craned forward instinctively, the way you do when someone shows you something you can't quite make out. And then those 5 men went quiet. Jack looked at the page for 4 seconds without speaking. His jaw didn't drop. His eyes didn't go wide. He was not a man built for dramatic external reactions. But something in his posture changed, a subtle release of the particular tension that road captains carry constantly, the braced readiness for trouble. Something loosened. Move, said a voice from behind the cluster. It was Devlin Cross, one of the older full patches, thick arms, gray beard, shot through with black, a man who had spent 30 years in the club and had earned the right to push through small crowds without asking twice. He moved through the gathered men and looked over Jack's shoulder at the sketchbook. What they were looking at was a rendering of a motorcycle, not a specific make or model that anyone could immediately identify, but recognizable in every essential way as the kind of machine that occupied this building and these lives. And the drawing was not technical. It was not the careful mechanical illustration of someone who had studied engineering. It was something else entirely. The bike in the sketch looked like it was moving, sitting still on the page, rendered in pencil and a handful of ink lines. It carried velocity. Somehow the lines of the frame suggesting accumulated miles rather than present stillness. The handlebars slightly asymmetrical, in a way that read as lived in rather than imprecise. There was a skull worked into the gas tank design, but it didn't look like decoration. It looked like it was trying to tell you something. The flames along the engine casing didn't look painted on. They looked like they were coming from inside the metal. She drew that, someone said. Apparently, someone else said. Devlin straightened up and looked at the girl. How long did that take you, he asked. About 40 minutes, Lena said. But I wasn't timing it. What are you working from, a reference? No. You just... Devlin stopped, started again. Where did you learn to draw like that? Nowhere specific, as she said. I've always drawn bikes since I was little. She paused. My brother had one. Nobody caught the significance of that yet. It would come. The crowd had thickened considerably by now. Word moved through the garage the way it always does in enclosed spaces, not through announcement, but through body language, through the gradual redirect of attention from whatever you were doing toward whatever everyone else was already looking at. Men who had been on the far side of the building working on their own machines were now standing in a loose ring, maybe 30, maybe 40 deep, looking at a girl holding a sketchbook. Tommy Briggs, 26, one of the newer full patches, the kind of young man who felt compelled to fill silences with something, spoke up from somewhere in the middle of the crowd. Okay, the drawing's good, he said, but drawing and painting are 2 different things. I can draw a burger pretty decent, but I can't cook. There was a ripple of agreement, not hostile, more the sound of people who were trying to apply logic to something that had briefly made them forget to be logical. That's fair, Lena said. She looked at him directly. So give me something to paint. Tommy blinked. Just like that. Just like that. He looked at Jack. Jack was quiet for a moment, studying the girl with the particular look he used when he was making a decision that he wanted to be sure about before he spoke it aloud. You paint on a bike you don't know, Jack said carefully, and something goes wrong, paint goes bad, prep work isn't right. You don't know the primer we use, you've potentially ruined something that took a man years to build. I know, she said. That doesn't scare you. Of course it scares me, she said, but I know what I can do. The room was quiet enough now that the background hum of the ventilation system was audible. Jack uncrossed his arms. 2 hours, he said. 1 tank. The raw dyna in the back corner, it hasn't been touched in 3 months. Nothing on it, bare metal. If what ends up on that tank makes me want to look at it, we'll talk about what comes next. He looked at her steadily. If it doesn't, you walk out and you don't come back. Deal, she said. She hadn't hesitated. She hadn't asked what she'd be paid or what the criteria were for success or whether there were any ground rules about what she could or couldn't paint. She had said, deal the way you say it when you already know your side of the agreement is solid. Jack turned and gestured at Briggs. Get her the tank off the dyno. Set her up at the work table by the side bay. Give her whatever she asked for. What if she asked for something we don't have? Briggs said. Then figure it out, Jack said and walked away. The tank was pulled and set up in 20 minutes. Briggs moved faster than expected, which nobody commented on but everyone noticed. He pulled the paint station out from the supply room, the rolling cart with the professional-grade airbrush setup, the racks of base coat and custom color, the clear coat sprays, and the brushes and sizes from fine liner to flat wash, and arranged it beside the work table with an efficiency that suggested he was at least partly curious how this was going to go. Lena set her sketchbook face down on a chair to the side, where nobody could look at it without being deliberate about it, and she stood in front of the tank for 30 seconds without touching anything. You need to sketch it out first, Briggs asked. No, she said. You need more light. I'm fine. I'll tell you if I need something, she said not unkindly, but right now I need you to not talk. Briggs opened his mouth, closed it, took 2 steps back. She picked up a liner brush, and she began. There is something that happens when you watch a person do the thing they are genuinely built to do. It's not always exciting to observe skills at a high level, often looks deceptively simple, deceptively quiet. A master carpenter running a hand plane makes it look effortless and therefore unremarkable to anyone who has never tried to do it badly. A surgeon making the first incision is precise and calm, and to the untrained eye looks like someone opening a letter. But sometimes the skill is visual. Sometimes what the person is making is visible in real time, and the transformation happening in front of you is impossible to misread. That was what happened when Lena Carter put brush to metal. The first line she drew was a long curve, not tentative, not corrected mid-stroke, but continuous and intentional from the moment the bristles touched the surface to the moment she lifted them. A single line that somehow immediately implied an entire form, the way a master calligrapher's first stroke establishes the character before the rest of the marks appear. Briggs was still standing 2 steps back. He watched the line go down and felt something shift in him that he didn't have a name for. He took 1 step forward. By the time she had been working for 10 minutes, there were 12 people watching. Not loudly, not the way the garage crowd usually clustered around something interesting with commentary and jokes and the constant verbal noise of men who can't observe without narrating. These 12 were quiet. They leaned in slightly. They watched the brush. At 20 minutes, there were 22 people. At 40 minutes, the work table had a ring of men around it, 3 deep in places, and the volume in the garage had dropped to almost nothing. Not because anyone had asked for quiet, because quiet had arrived on its own. What was appearing on the tank was not what most of them had expected. They had expected something technically competent, a skull maybe, or a flame design, something conventional that would prove she knew her way around custom paint, something demonstrably skilled, but essentially familiar. What was appearing instead was something none of them could entirely put into words. There was movement in it, not implied movement, felt movement, the kind that makes your eye travel whether you want it to or not. There was a figure, 2 figures actually emerging from a long, winding road that receded toward the center of the design, the road itself rendered with a kind of intimate familiarity that made it look like a specific road rather than a generic one. The riders on that road were seen from behind and at distance, which meant they were defined not by their faces but by their posture, the set of their shoulders, the way they sat on their machines, and somehow that made them more recognizable, not less. You got the impression that you knew these people, that you had ridden behind someone who sat exactly like that. Devlin Cross had come back. He was standing at the right shoulder of the ring and arms cross saying nothing. He had been there for 25 minutes. At the 50-minute mark, he leaned toward the man beside him, an older full-patch named Reed who had been in the club almost as long, and said quietly without taking his eyes off the tank, "That doesn't look painted." Reed said nothing for a moment. "No," he said finally, "it doesn't." "It looks," Devlin paused, searched. Remembered, he said. It looks remembered. She worked for an hour and 20 minutes before she put the liner brush down and picked up a detail brush so fine it looked like it had maybe 6 hairs on it. Nobody in the ring had moved. A few had come and gone and come back again, which was its own kind of testament. They had walked away to attend to something else and found that whatever the something else was, it couldn't hold them. Jack Rourke had returned 3 times. He hadn't stayed on any of the visits. He would stand at the edge of the ring for 2 or 3 minutes, watch the tank, and then pull away without comment. But he came back. That was the significant part. At the 1 hour, 47-minute mark, Lena set down the detail, brush straightened her back slowly the way a person does when they've been bent at an angle for longer than they realize, and stepped back from the tank. She didn't say she was done. She didn't step aside and gesture toward it. She just stepped back, and the absence of her body in front of the work was its own announcement. The ring tightened. The men at the back moved forward. Those already at the front shifted aside to let the ones behind see clearly. The tank held something that took several seconds to absorb in its totality because it rewarded looking. The longer you looked, the more you found in it. The 2 riders on the receding road. The wings, not literal wings, but the suggestion of them integrated into the frame of the image so naturally that you had to look twice to understand why the design felt like it was capable of lift. The layered texture of the sky above the road, which managed to be simultaneously late afternoon and early morning in a way that shouldn't have worked but did, in the words. Worked into the space where the road met the horizon, lettered in a style that felt less like a font and more like handwriting of someone who had lettered things before, who knew how to make letters carry weight. What the road gives. The room didn't erupt. There was no noise, no exclamation, no collective exhale that you'd hear if you wrote this as a scene in a movie. What happened was something quieter and more absolute. The room stopped. Not paused. Stopped. Because those 4 words, what the road gives, were not hers. They belonged to Luther Hart. Luther Hart had been a full-patch member of this chapter for 9 years. He had not been a loudly legendary figure in the way that some men became legend inside club walls, not known for a single dramatic act or a famous story that got retold at every gathering. He had been known for something harder to quantify and more durable, a quality of presence. The kind of man who made a room feel different when he was in it, not because he commanded attention, but because he paid it. He had listened when other men talked. He had remembered things. He had over 9 years accumulated the kind of deep, specific regard that you cannot manufacture and cannot fake. He had also been the person who put those words on the first design he ever painted inside this chapter. What the road gives. He had explained it once to a small group sitting outside after a long run. The road gives you what it gives you. You don't get to negotiate. You don't get to ask for a different deal. You take what it hands you and you ride it. The phrase had stuck. It had become his, not formally, not through any process of adoption, but in the way that certain expressions become attached to certain people simply because the association is too accurate to be accidental. Luther Hart had left the chapter 14 months ago. Not under bad terms. He had not been expelled, had not wronged the club, had not broken anything that mattered. He had gone quiet. He had said he needed time. And then the time had extended and extended until it had become something closer to absence. And the chapter had not heard from him in 8 months, and the last anyone had known, he was somewhere in the southwestern states doing something that nobody could quite pin down. He was gone. Not dead so far as anyone knew, but gone in the way that feels like loss, because the shape of the absence is the shape of the person. Jack Rourke stared at the words on the tank. He turned to look at the girl. "Where did you get that phrase?" he asked. His voice was perfectly level. The levelness was deliberate. Lena looked at him. "It's what my brother says," she said. "Used to say, it's his." Jack felt something go very still inside his chest. "What's your brother's name?" he said. She held his gaze, and he saw in the moment before she answered that she had been waiting for this question, that she had known it was coming the moment she painted those words, that the painting of those words was in fact an opening, a door she had made, and was now inviting him to step through. "Luther Hart," she said, trying. The name moved through the ring of men the way sound moves through water, not loudly but in every direction at once. It wasn't a gasp. It wasn't a murmur. It was the particular noise that a crowd makes when something that was already present reveals itself like a shape in fog that the fog was hiding, and the fog moves, and there it is, and you realize you were looking at it the whole time. Devlin Cross uncrossed his arms. Reed said something very quietly to the man beside him that nobody else heard. Tommy Briggs, who had been standing at the edge of the ring for the last hour, looked at the girl, and then at the tank, and then at the girl again, and his face did the work of someone rearranging a large number of things at the same time. Jack didn't move. Luther didn't have a sister, he said. Not an accusation, a fact being offered for correction. He didn't talk about me much, Lena said. We grew up in different houses. Same father, different mothers. He's 11 years older than me. She paused. He knew about me. We found each other about 4 years ago. We have been in contact since. You have any proof? Jack said. She reached into the sketchbook, which was on the chair to her left, in which she had not touched since she began painting, and she pulled from inside the back cover a folded photograph. She held it toward him. Jack crossed to her, took the photograph, unfolded it. It was Luther. Unmistakably Luther, his height, his build, the tattoo on the left forearm that the chapter knew well. He was standing beside a much younger girl, maybe 13 or 14 in the photograph, who had the same gray eyes that were looking at Jack Rourke right now. Luther had his hand on her shoulder. They were both looking at the camera, and Luther was smiling the way he smiled, the closed, genuine, private smile that he almost never directed at anyone outside a very small circle. Jack looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he looked up at Lena. Why did you come here? He asked. Because he's missing, she said. And because the last thing he told me was that if I ever needed somewhere to stand, this was where he would want me to go. The room did not erupt then either, but it changed. The way a room changes when the thing it was circling turns out to be the thing that matters. Jack folded the photograph carefully and held it back to her. When did you last hear from him? 6 months ago, she said. A text. It said, I'm okay, keep moving, you'll figure it out. And then nothing. You've been looking for him since... I've been surviving since, she said with a precision that landed quietly and left a mark. Looking for him at the same time, but mostly surviving. Jack studied her for a moment. He did not ask follow-up questions. He had learned over decades that the most important information usually arrived without being pushed, for that patience in conversation was a form of respect, and that most people given space would tell you what they actually needed to tell you. He turned to face the tank again. The design, the words, what the road gives. He stood there for a moment that stretched. Then he turned back to the room. Somebody get her something to drink, he said, and somebody make sure that tank doesn't get touched. It was not a warm declaration. It was not a formal welcome or an announcement of acceptance. It was a road captain giving 2 specific instructions, both of which were extensions of protection, one for the person, one for the thing she had made. But in this room, in this language, it was enough. Lena Carter sat down in the chair beside her sketchbook, and she did not look relieved, and she did not look triumphant. She looked like someone who had been walking for a very long time and had, for the first time in a long time, stopped moving without being forced to. Someone brought her a bottle of water. She accepted it without comment. Around her, the ring of men slowly began to dissolve, not because the moment had ended, but because the moment had shifted into something new, something that required processing rather than witnessing. Men returned to their workstations. Conversations restarted. The ambient noise of the garage began to rebuild. But the tank sat where it was, and men found reasons to walk past it. And when they walked past it, they looked. Devlin Cross was one of the last to move. He stood in front of it for as long a time after most of the others had dispersed, his arms loose at his sides for once, instead of Cross studying the 2 riders on the receding road with an expression that said he was seeing something specific in them, something personal. He finally turned away. He walked past Lena without stopping, but as he passed, he said low and without fanfare, he talked about you. Not by name, but he talked about you. He kept walking. Lena didn't respond, but she held onto the bottle of water a little tighter, and she looked at the middle distance with an expression that was doing a great deal of quiet work. Jack Rourke stood at his workbench at the far end of the bay, the Sportster's brake assembly still waiting for him, and he didn't pick up his wrench. He was thinking. The girl had not come here for tips. He had known that from the moment he held the photograph. She had come carrying a story that she had wrapped around a talent so that she could walk through a door that would otherwise have been closed to her. She had used the only currency she had, her skill, Her brother's phrase, her own nerve, and she had walked it into the most unwelcoming room she could have chosen. That took something. Jack Rourke had no word for what it took, but he had a strong instinct that it was the kind of thing you either had or you didn't. He looked at the tank from across the bay. What the road gives. He picked up his wrench. There was going to be a conversation. There were going to be questions asked and questions answered, and there were things about Luther Hart that this girl might not know, and things she might know that the chapter didn't, and all of that was going to have to be navigated carefully and honestly. But that was later. That was when the dust settled. Right now, a girl was sitting in his garage drinking a bottle of water, and she had painted something on a bare metal tank that he was going to be thinking about for a long time. And nobody, not Jack, not Devlin, not any of the 240 men in that building had any idea yet what was coming, what the custody papers would say when they arrived, what the man watching from across the street already knew, what the next weeks would require of all of them. But you don't know what's coming when you're inside a moment. You only know where you're standing. And Lena Carter, for the first time in 14 months, knew exactly where she was standing. She was standing in her brother's second home, and she was not leaving. Nobody asked her to leave that night. That was the thing Lena noticed. First, nobody asked her to leave. The garage ran until past 9 the way it always did on busy days, and she sat in the chair beside her sketchbook and watched the place work itself down from full noise to a low hum, and nobody came to her and said, "Okay, time to go. You've had your tryout. You can collect whatever we owe you and find your way out." Nobody said that. Nobody said anything to her at all for a long stretch, which was its own kind of statement. She drank the water. She watched. She had learned a long time ago that watching was one of the most useful things a person could do in an unfamiliar place. Not passively, not the watching of someone who is waiting for things to make sense on their own, but the active watching of someone cataloging. Learning the hierarchy from how people moved around each other. Learning the tensions from which conversations stopped when someone walked into them. Learning the rhythms of the place from what it sounded like at full capacity versus what it sounded like when the pace was easing. By 8 o'clock, she had a reasonable map of the room in her head. Jack Rourke was the center of gravity, not the loudest presence, not the most physically imposing, but the one that other men oriented toward. When something needed deciding, bodies turned in his direction, even before anyone spoke. Devlin Cross was something different, a kind of elder authority, the repository of institutional memory, the man whose opinion carried weight precisely because he offered it rarely. Tommy Briggs was the volatile edge of the room, full of energy without a fixed outlet, the kind of young man who would either grow into something solid or burn through himself trying. There were others. She filed them away. At 8:40, Jack came and sat in the folding chair 6 feet from her. He didn't pull it closer. He sat with his forearms on his knees and looked at the tank for a moment before he looked at her. "Tell me about Luther," he said. "Not the brother story. Tell me what you know about where he went." Lena turned the water bottle in her hands. "He called me in January," she said. "Before that last text. He was in New Mexico somewhere. He didn't say where exactly, but I could hear wind in the background and the specific kind of silence that's desert silence, so I assume southwest. He said he was doing something he needed to finish. He didn't tell me what. Did he sound scared?" She considered this carefully. No, he sounded decided, like someone who had made a choice that cost him something, but he was done arguing with himself about it. Jack nodded slowly. "And after that, February, March, nothing. I sent messages, no response. I tried a number he'd used before disconnected. I asked around, but I don't know his people in the same way. I know some names, not many, so I came here." "Why not the police?" The look she gave him was not unkind, but it was very clear. "Luther told me once that the police were not the right instrument for certain problems," she said. "I think he'd have had opinions about me walking into a police station and reporting him missing." Something shifted in Jack's expression, not quite a smile, but the territory adjacent to it. "He would have?" Jack agreed. He was quiet for a moment. "Luther left this chapter 14 months ago. Not with any drama, he just came to me one morning and said he had something he needed to handle, and he didn't know how long it would take. I asked him if he needed backup. He said no. I asked him if he'd be in contact. He said when he could be." Jack paused. "I've heard from him twice since then. Once to say he was alive, Once to say he was close to done with whatever it was. That was 4 months ago. Lena was very still. You've heard from him more recently than I have, she said. Yes. So he's probably alive. Probably, Jack said. In this line of knowing, probably is the best you usually get. She took that in without flinching, which told Jack something important about what the last 14 months had actually looked like for her, that she had already made her peace with uncertainty, had already had to, and the probably was something she could metabolize. Is he in trouble? She asked. Jack looked at her directly. I don't know, he said, and that's the honest answer, not the diplomatic one. She nodded. Okay, she said, then I'll wait here. Jack blinked. Wait here. Until something changes, until there's information, until he comes back, or she stopped. Until something changes. Jack leaned back. You don't have a place to stay, he said. It wasn't a question. I've been staying at a motel on Route 9. I've got enough for maybe 6 more nights. And after 6 nights, I'll figure it out, she said. I've been figuring it out for 14 months. I'm reasonably good at it. Jack was quiet for a moment, and Lena could see him working through something. Not a simple calculation, not just logistics, but something larger and more careful, the kind of thinking that a person in his position had to do when an unknown variable walked into a controlled environment and sat down and refused to leave. You'd want to earn your keep, he said finally. Obviously. You'd need to follow rules. This isn't a gallery. It isn't a studio. There are ways this place works, and you'd need to respect them. I understand that. Some of the men aren't going to be comfortable with you here. Some of them already aren't, she said. I noticed. He almost smiled again. I'll talk to Devlin, he said. He's got a spare room above the machine shop 2 blocks over. It's not much. I'm not asking for much. He stood up. He looked at the tank one more time. You painted that in under 2 hours, he said. 147, she said. I know. He picked up his jacket. Don't touch anything in the supply room without asking. Don't open any cabinet you're not specifically directed to. If someone talks to you rough, come find me or Devlin before you respond. He said it the way you say things that matter without wanting to make a ceremony out of them. Okay, Lena said. He walked toward the door, then stopped. That phrase he said without turning. What the road gives, he say it a lot. Every time something went wrong, she said, which was often enough that I heard it a lot. Jack nodded once, kept walking. The garage was mostly empty now, 2 men finishing up at the far end, the ventilation hum, the smell of oil and metal, and something underneath both of those that she had already started to identify as simply the smell of this place, which was going to be her place now, at least for a while. She picked up her sketchbook. She looked at the tank. What the road gives. She had not planned to paint those words. She had told herself walking in that morning that she would paint something skillful and something true, but that she wouldn't show her full hand immediately, that the words were too specific, too identifiable, too much of a risk if the room reacted wrong. She had told herself she would hold them back, but then her hand had moved and the words had appeared, and she understood in retrospect that there had never been a version of this where she held them back. She had come too far for half measures. She had survived too much to arrive at the door and not quietly. She tucked the sketchbook under her arm. She left the garage, and across the street in a gray sedan parked in the shadow between 2 streetlights, a man with a camera lowered it from his face and made a note on the pad beside him.
It's Sahar.
3 days passed, then 4, then a week. Devlin's spare room above the machine shop was small and had a window that faced an alley and a radiator that made sounds at night like it was working through a personal problem, but it had a lock and a bed and a surface she could use as a table, and Lena had been in worse. She pinned blank pages to the wall above the table, and she sketched during the hours when she wasn't at the garage, which were fewer and fewer as the days went on. She was at the garage by 8 every morning, not because anyone told her to be, because that was where the work was. The work was at first the careful and deliberate business of proving herself in layers rather than all at once. She had earned one thing with the tank, the right to be looked at rather than immediately ejected. She had not earned the right to touch another bike without invitation, or to move through the supply room freely, or to have access to the shop's professional paint setup without supervision. Those things would come in increments, or they wouldn't come at all. She understood that. So she made herself useful in other ways first. She was good with her hands in a general sense, Growing up the way she had grown up meant that you learned to fix things because you couldn't always afford to hire someone to fix them. And she knew basic mechanical work, enough to be a second set of hands rather than an obstruction. She organized, she cleaned, she did the quiet background work that nobody assigned, and therefore nobody had to thank her for, which was the most effective kind of gratitude building in a room full of people who found explicit gratitude uncomfortable. On the fourth day, a full patch named Garrison, mid-50s Wyatt, meticulous, the kind of man whose bike was always the cleanest in the room, came and stood beside her while she was reorganizing the paint supply racks. "You know color theory?" he asked. "Some," she said. "What do you know about adhesion issues on chrome-finished tanks?" She told him. It took about 4 minutes. He listened without interrupting, asked 2 follow-up questions, and walked away without comment. 2 hours later, he came back and put a bike tank on the work table and said, "I need flames. Traditional style, but I want them to look like they're coming through the metal, not sitting on top of it. You know how to do that?" "Yes," she said. "How long?" 3 hours if I don't rush it." "Don't rush it," he said, and walked away. She did it in 2 hours and 40 minutes. The flames looked like they were coming through the metal. Garrison looked at the tank for a long time when he came back. He didn't say anything effusive. He touched the edge of one flame, carefully checking the finish. He stepped back. "What do I owe you?" he said. "Tips," she said. "Remember, that's the deal." He reached into his jacket pocket and put 3 folded bills on the table without counting them. He picked up the tank. He was halfway to his bike before he stopped and said over his shoulder, "You do good work." That was the whole sentence. He kept walking. Lena unfolded the bills. $400. She folded them back up and put them in her jeans. Tips, she thought. Okay. By the end of the second week, she had done 6 tanks. Word moved the way word moves organically and without announcement, the way reputation actually builds rather than the way people imagine it builds, which is usually through some dramatic public confirmation. A man would see another man's tank and ask who did the work. The name would get passed to past. A request would follow. She never solicited, she never showed the sketchbook to anyone who hadn't already watched her paint. She just showed up and did what she did. Tommy Briggs came to her on a Thursday morning and sat on the edge of the work table while she was prepping a tank, not Garrison's style of approach, which had been direct and task-oriented, but the circling approach of someone who had something to say and was deciding how to say it. "You know, people are talking about you," he said. "People talk about whatever's new," she said. "Give it a month." "No, I mean," he stopped, tried again. "I mean some of the older guys. They're saying things about Luther, about you, about the fact that you showed up here." She kept working. "What kind of things?" "Some of them think it's too much of a coincidence." "It's not a coincidence," she said. "I came here on purpose." "Yeah, but..." He shifted. Luther left things behind when he went, not just a chapter. There were things that were unresolved, business things, and some of the older guys are wondering if you know about them. She set down the prep cloth and looked at him directly. "Do you know what the business things are?" she asked. "Some of it," he said. "Not all of it." "Then tell me the sum." Tommy looked at the floor. He was not a naturally cautious person, but he was currently doing his best impression of one. "There was a situation," he said carefully, "before Luther left, something he was looking into, some kind of financial thing involving people outside the club. He came to Jack about it. Jack told him to leave it alone. Luther said he couldn't leave it alone. And then a few weeks later, Luther was gone." Lena was very still. "And nobody has connected those two things officially," she said. "Officially, no. But people have thought about it." "People have thought about it," he confirmed. She picked up the prep cloth, set it down again. "Tommy," she said, "what kind of financial thing?" He looked at her for a long moment, making a decision. "There's a man named Hargrove," he said. "Gerald Hargrove. He runs a financial services company about 40 miles north of here. About 2 years ago, some members of this chapter, not leadership, not Jack, but regular members, got connected with some of his investment products. And then things started going wrong. People lost money, not a little, a lot. And when they tried to get answers, the answers didn't add up. And Luther was looking into it," Lena said. "Luther was one of the ones who got his people in. His cousin, his uncle. He felt responsible, so he started asking questions. and the questions made someone nervous. That's what some people think, Tommy said. I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm saying that's what some people think happened. Lena absorbed this without speaking for a moment. Does Jack know you're telling me this? She asked. No, Tommy said immediately. Why are you telling me? He met her eyes. Because you came here looking for your brother, and I think you came for the right reasons. And I think you deserve to know what the ground looks like before you walk further out onto it. It was the most serious she had heard him speak. The energy that usually came off him sideways was pointed directly forward for once, and it made him look older than his age. Thank you, she said. He nodded, got off the table, took 2 steps. Lena, he said, stopping. Don't tell Jack I told you. Not yet. Okay, she said. He left. She stared at the tank in front of her. Gerald Hargrove. She didn't know the name, but she had a feeling she was going to learn it very well. The piece Jack had been working on for 3 days, a full custom build from bare frame for a member named Castallo, who'd been with the chapter 20 years and wanted something that told his whole story on 2 wheels, had reached the paint stage. Jack came to her on a Friday afternoon and stood at her work table and told her what he wanted in the kind of specific detail that told her he had been thinking about it for a long time. He wanted the desert. He wanted a long highway running through it. He wanted something in the distance, not a figure, not a landmark, just an impression of something waiting. He wanted it in a color palette that felt like late afternoon, the specific late afternoon of the high desert Southwest, the golds and dusty reds in the particular shade of shadow that lives under rock formations when the sun is dropping. He described it for maybe 8 minutes. She listened without writing anything down. You got all that, he said. Yes, she said. You sure I can? Jack, she said. I got it. He looked at her for a moment. Something moved through his expression that she was learning to recognize as the functional equivalent in a man like Jack Rourke of confidence. Okay, he said. Don't rush it. This is Castillo's build. It matters. She nodded. He started to leave. Jack, she said. He stopped. The name Hargrove, she said. Gerald Hargrove. Does that mean anything to you? The pause before he answered was maybe 2 seconds long. In ordinary conversation, 2 seconds is nothing. In a room where someone has just said a name they weren't supposed to know, 2 seconds is a very long time. Where did you hear that name? He said. His voice had not changed in temperature or register at all, which was itself information. Around, she said. Around is a big place, he said. It is, she agreed. He turned to face her fully. He looked at her with the particular attention of a man who was reassessing something he thought he had already assessed. What are you asking me? He said. I'm asking if my brother's disappearance and Gerald Hargrove are connected, she said. And I'm asking directly because I think indirect is a waste of both our time. Another pause. Longer this time. What do you know? He said. Enough to ask the question, she said. Not enough to answer it. Jack looked at the tank in front of her. The desert build for Castillo. The high desert late afternoon she had already designed in her head. Luther found something, Jack said finally. His voice was different now. Not guarded exactly, but careful in a different way. The way you're careful when you're choosing which true things to say. He found something in Hargrove's operation that went beyond the money our guys lost. Something bigger. Something that involved people who weren't connected to this chapter at all. Civilians. People who had no protection. Lena waited. He came to me, Jack said. I told him that what he was describing, if he was right, was not something you approach the way he was approaching it. That there were ways to handle situations like that which didn't put him in the position of a single man walking into something designed to swallow single men whole. And he disagreed, she said. He said the people who were getting hurt couldn't wait for the right approach, Jack said. He said he already had enough to move on, and he was going to move on it. Jack paused. And I told him if he went down that road without the chapter behind him, I couldn't guarantee what I could do for him. And he went anyway. He went anyway, Jack said, because that's who Luther Hart is. He looked at her. Who he is, present tense, as far as I know. She held that, present tense. It was a gift the way he said it. And Hargrove, she asked, is he still operating? Yes, Jack said, 40 miles north. Big office, good lawyers, a reputation in certain county circles as a legitimate businessman. His jaw tightened slightly, the first visible sign of what he felt about that. Legitimate. Has the club done anything? We've been careful, Jack said, because careful is the approach that keeps people from going to prison and keeps the chapter standing. And because he stopped, started again. Because what Luther found, if it's what he thought it was, is the kind of thing that has to be handled correctly or it doesn't get handled at all. It gets buried and the people responsible walk away. She understood what he wasn't saying. He was telling her that he had been working on it, that the careful approach was not the same as no approach, that something was moving just slowly just beneath the surface. She looked at the tank. I'll start Castillo's build on Monday, she said. I want to do the prep work right. Jack looked at her for a moment longer. She could feel him deciding how much to say, how much to trust, how much of what he was thinking to put into actual words. Your brother told me about you, he said finally. Not directly, not your name, but he talked about someone once, someone younger, someone he felt responsible for. He said she had his father's stubbornness and his mother's nerve, and that the combination was either going to get her somewhere extraordinary or get her killed before she got there. Lena said nothing. I'm starting to think he meant extraordinary, Jack said. He left. She sat with her for a long time before she picked up a brush. The 15th day was a Saturday. The garage ran a full open day on Saturdays, not just chapter business, but the kind of informal gathering that had been part of how this chapter operated for 30 years. Members brought friends. Prospects brought their own people sometimes. The perimeter of the space expanded on Saturdays to accommodate the reality that a club of this size existed inside a community, not apart from it, and the community was aware of that and operated accordingly. Lena had her first real encounter with that dimension of the place on that Saturday morning when a woman named Sandra arrived at 10 with her teenage son and made straight for the work table where Lena was cleaning brushes. Sandra was maybe 45, compact, no-nonsense energy, the wife of a full patch named Reeves who had been in the chapter for 15 years. She looked at Lena with the thorough and efficient assessment of a woman who has learned to make fast, accurate judgments about people. You're the painter, Sandra said. Yes, Lena said, the one who did Garrison's Flames. Yes. Sandra reached into her bag and produced a photograph printed on regular paper, not glossy, the edges slightly crumpled. It was a photograph of a helmet, old, cracked on one side. The paint on it was faded, but you could see it had once been something, the ghost of a design under the degradation. This was my husband's first helmet, she said. He wore it for 9 years. The design on it was done by a man who died 6 years ago. I want it not copied exactly, but remembered. I want someone to look at that helmet and know something of what the original was. She put the photograph on the table. Lena picked it up, looked at it closely. The ghost design was a bird, not an eagle, something more angular, something that felt more personal than symbolic. A phoenix, she asked. His mother's idea originally, Sandra said. She told him when he started writing that she needed to know he'd always come back. So he had it painted, the bird that comes back. Lena set the photograph down. I can do this, she said. Give me the helmet and 2 days. Sandra reached into the bag again and produced the helmet. She set it on the table between them. Don't make it pretty, Sandra said. Make it true. Lena looked up at her. That's always the harder version, she said. Sandra almost smiled. I know, she said. That's why I brought it to you. She walked away. Her son, maybe 16, lanky, trying very hard to look like he wasn't fascinated by everything he was seeing, lingered for a moment at the edge of the table. How do you know what to paint? He asked. His voice cracked slightly on the last word, which he ignored with the dignity of someone who has learned to proceed through embarrassment. Lena considered the question. You look at what someone's already started, she said. You find the part that's still alive under the damage, and you follow that. He nodded slowly as if she'd told him something that applied to more than helmets. Cool, he said. He went to find his mother. Lena picked up the helmet, turned it in her hands, found the part of the design that was still visible under the cracking and the fading. The line of a wing, the suggestion of an upward angle, the bird in the moment before it opened. She picked up a brush. The garage moved around her. Men talked, laughed, argued. Bikes were started and revved and shut off. Music moved through the speaker system. The smell of the place oil and metal and coffee and leather had become in 15 days the smell of somewhere she knew. She painted. And 3 tables away, Devlin Cross sat with his coffee and watched her work and thought about Luther Hart and the strange specific mercy of the universe that had sent the man's sister through the door, carrying his words on the day the chapter needed to remember who it was supposed to be. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. The message was from a number he didn't recognize, and it said only 4 words. He read them twice. He stood up slowly with the unhurried movement of a man who has trained himself not to show alarm in public, and he walked toward Jack Rourke's office at the back of the building. He knocked. "Jack," he said, "you need to see this." Jack opened the door. Devlin held up the phone. The 4 words on the screen read, "She is being watched." Jack looked at the message. Then he looked through the office window, toward the main floor, toward the work table, toward the girl with the brush in her hand, who was painting a phoenix back to life, and did not know that something outside was already closing in. "When did this come in?" Jack said. 30 seconds ago." "Do you know the number?" "No." Jack took the phone, looked at the message again. His jaw set. "Get me Reed," he said, "and don't let her out of your sight." Devlin went. Jack stood in the doorway of his office and watched Lena work, and he thought about Gerald Hargrove, and he thought about a gray sedan that 2 of his men had mentioned seeing on the street outside the garage twice in the past week. And he thought about the particular kind of patience that predators use when they are waiting for the right moment. She is being watched. He already knew. The question was, who was watching, and what they were waiting for her to do. Reed found the gray sedan in 11 minutes. He didn't do it dramatically. No confrontation, no circling the block with intent showing on his face. Reed was 53 years old and had been in this chapter since before some of the current prospects were born, and he had learned early that the most effective surveillance counter-surveillance looked exactly like a man walking to his truck to get something he forgot. He went out the side door. He walked the block. He clocked the sedan's plate, the make, the model, the approximate height of the man sitting in the driver's seat, and he came back inside and wrote it on the back of a receipt he pulled from his jacket pocket. He put the receipt on Jack's desk. Jack looked at it. "How long you think he's been sitting there?" "There's a coffee cup on the dash that looks like it's been there a while," Reed said. "And he's got a camera with a long lens on the passenger seat. Not hiding it especially." "Not hiding it," Jack repeated. "No, which means either he's sloppy or he wants us to know we're being looked at." "Or both," Jack said. "Or both," Reed agreed. Jack turned the receipt over in his fingers. "You recognize the plate. Ran it through Briggs. Comes back to a private investigative services company registered in the county. Clean on paper. No flags. Who hires a PI to watch a biker garage?" Reed was quiet for a moment. "Someone who wants information on a specific person inside it," he said. "Not the club, the person." They both looked through the office window toward the work table. Lena was finishing the base coat on Sandra's helmet, working in the focused silence she always worked in the rest of the room, moving around her without disturbing whatever interior state the painting required. She had no idea she was being discussed. She had no idea there was a man with a camera 30 yards from where she was sitting, or she appeared not to. Jack had learned to be precise about the difference. "Don't move on him yet," Jack said. "I want to know who hired him before we do anything else. Briggs can make a call to someone who knows the company. I want a name." Reed nodded, started for the door. "And Reed," Jack said, "keep it quiet from her for now." Reed paused. "She's going to find out." "I know," Jack said, "but I want to find out what we're dealing with first." Reed left. Jack stood at the window, watched Lena work, thought about the 4-word text which had come from an unknown number and which no subsequent trace had identified. Someone had sent it who wanted to help but not to be known. That narrowed the field considerably. It was someone who knew the situation, who knew Lena was inside, who had reason to warn, but not to reveal themselves. Someone who knew about the Watcher before the chapter did. Jack filed that and moved it to the category of things he'd return to. Briggs came back with name at 2:30 in the afternoon. He found Jack in the main bay and said it quietly, close in the way you say something you don't want to travel. "Raymond Coyle," he said, "solo operator, but he's got a regular relationship with a legal firm in the county, Voss and Associates." Jack went very still. "Voss," he said. "Victoria Voss," Briggs said. "Family law. She's got a practice that handles guardianship cases, custody disputes, estate matters." "How does she connect to Lena?" "Best guess," Briggs said. "She's family, or she's representing family." He pulled out his phone, showed Jack a pulled record, a business registration, a website. Victoria Voss, J.D. Family Law. The photograph on the website showed a woman in her 50s, expensive suit, the composed expression of someone who litigated for a living and had learned that composure was a weapon. "What's the family connection?" Jack asked. "Still working on that," Briggs said, "but Coyle's been on Lena for at least 10 days. Before she even showed up here, there's a motel on Route 9 he was seen in the area." Jack processed this without showing what it did to him. 10 days. Coyle had been watching before she walked through the door, which meant whoever hired him knew where she was before she knocked, which meant the arrival at the garage, Lena's bold, apparently impulsive walk into the most unwelcoming room she could have chosen, was not unknown to whoever was watching. They had watched her go in, and they were still watching, which meant they were waiting for something specific. Not just to know where she was, to know what she did. "What would Voss want?" Jack said. "If she's family law, what's the action?" "Guardianship," Briggs said. "Lena's 18, so it's not custody in the traditional sense. But if someone can argue that she's vulnerable, that she's being influenced by people with a criminal record that she's not capable of..." He stopped. "It's leverage, or it's control." "Over what?" Briggs shrugged. "Over her, over whatever she might know, over whatever Luther left behind." Jack put his hand flat on the workbench beside him. Not hard, the contained pressure of a man keeping himself very deliberately measured. "Luther had a will," he said. "I don't know," Briggs said. "But if he did, and if Lena is in it, and if someone else thought they should be in it..." "Find out," Jack said. "Everything you can, quietly." Briggs went. Jack looked at his own reflection in the chrome of the nearest tank. He looked at himself for a moment, the gray at his temples, the line of his jaw, the way his eyes had the settled look of a man who had been through enough that very few things surprised him anymore. This had not surprised him. He had felt it coming the way you feel weather changing before the sky shows it. The question was how to move and how fast. He went out to the main floor. He sat down in the folding chair 6 feet from Lena's work table, the same chair, the same distance, the same posture as the first conversation, because it was a language she would recognize. She looked up. "You have something to tell me," she said, not a question. "Yes," he said. She set down her brush. She turned to face him fully, and he noticed that she did it the same way she did everything, without stalling, without the small, nervous physical adjustments that people use to buy themselves a moment. She just turned and looked at him and waited. "There's a private investigator who has been watching you," Jack said. "He's been on you for at least 10 days. He works regularly with a legal firm called Voss and Associates, family law." Something moved through Lena's face. It was banding and it was controlled, but it was there, a recognition, and under the recognition, something harder. Not fear, not surprise, something that looked like the specific exhaustion of someone hearing a name they had been dreading and had halfway known was coming. "Victoria Voss," Lena said. "You know her." "She's my father's sister," Lena said. "My aunt, Luther's aunt too, technically, though they're not blood. She's on my father's side, not Luther's mother's side." She looked at the helmet in front of her. "She's been trying to reach me since January. I've been not answering." "Why?" "Because she doesn't want to help me," Lena said. "She wants to manage me. There's a difference." She paused. "When my father died 3 years ago, he left some things. Not much money, some property, a storage unit full of things that nobody wanted to deal with, and some papers that I've never fully understood." She looked at Jack. "I think he left something for Luther, and I think Victoria knows what it is, and I think she wants to control it." "Do you know what it is?" Jack asked. "No," she said, "but Luther knew. Luther always knew more about my father's affairs than I did. He was older, he was around more. He knew things." She stopped. Her jaw tightened. "I think whatever Luther was investigating Hargrove, the money, the people who got hurt, I think it connects to my father somehow. I don't know how, She pushed a hand through her hair. "It keeps feeling like it should connect, and I can't find the line." Jack leaned forward slightly. "What kind of business was your father in?" he said. "Real estate, low-level property management. Nothing impressive." She paused. "But he knew people. He had associations I never understood. Men who came to the house sometimes when I was a kid, not social visits. Business. Always at unusual hours. Always brief." Jack said nothing for a moment. "Did Luther ever talk about your father's associations?" he said. Once, Lena said. He said Dad knew some people he shouldn't have known and tried to keep a wall between them and us. He said Dad wasn't a bad man. He just made choices that left doors open he couldn't close. She looked at her hands. I didn't know what to do with that at the time. I think I understand it better now. Jack stood up. Here's what's going to happen, he said. Coyle is going to keep watching until he has what Victoria Voss needs to move legally. What she's building toward is probably a petition, some kind of legal claim that puts her in a position of authority over you, over your decisions, over whatever you might have access to through Luther. She can't do that, Lena said. I am 18. She can try, Jack said. Family law attorneys find arguments. That's the job. She'll find something, vulnerability, undue influence, something that puts you on the defensive and puts her in front of a judge. He met her eyes, which means we have a window, a limited one. A window for what? For finding the line you said you can't find, he said. The connection between your father and Hargrove and Luther. Because if that line exists and we can trace it before she moves legally, we change the ground you're standing on entirely. Lena looked at him. We, she said. Jack held her gaze. We, he confirmed. The chapter had a way of making decisions that looked informal, but wasn't. There were no votes taken, no formal sessions called. Jack spoke to Devlin. Devlin spoke to Reed and to Garrison and to 3 or 4 of the other senior full patches whose judgment had been established over decades. And then those men separately and apparently casually arrived at the same position, and the position became the chapter's position without ever being announced as such. The position was Lena Carter was one of theirs. Not permanently, not irrevocably, she hadn't earned that, and they wouldn't pretend she had. But provisionally, in the way that mattered right now, she was under this chapter's protection, and anyone moving against her was moving against the chapter. Tommy Briggs felt this shift happen and described it later as something like a temperature change, the way a room gets warmer when more people move into it, not because anyone turned up the heat, but because the collective presence of bodies changes the atmosphere without deliberate action. He told this to Lena on a Tuesday evening when they were both in the garage after most people had gone, her cleaning brushes him doing what he usually did in the evenings, which was find reasons to be where things were happening rather than go home to an apartment that was quiet in ways he found difficult. Do you understand what just happened? He said. Explain it to me, she said. These men, he gestured broadly at the space around them, they don't adopt people. It doesn't work like that. You're not a mascot, you're not a charity case, you're not a novelty. They decided you're worth protecting. Because, he stopped, tried again, because you're Luther's, and because you walked in here and you were straight with them when you could have played it any number of easier ways. And because what you do with a brush makes men who don't feel things in public feel things in public. Lena was quiet. That scares me a little, she said. Being protected, being worth something to a group of people, she said. Because then you're responsible for their willingness to put themselves out. And if something goes wrong, that's their call to make, Tommy said, not yours. She looked at him. You sound like Luther, she said. He didn't know what to do with that, so he just nodded. She went back to cleaning the brush. So, the package arrived on a Wednesday. It came through Devlin, handed to him by a courier at the side door. No return address, just Devlin's name, and the garage's street address in handwriting that was cramped, imprecise. Inside the outer envelope was a smaller envelope sealed with 2 words on the front, Jack only. Jack opened it in his office with the door closed. Inside was a USB drive and a single folded sheet of paper. The paper had 7 lines of text on it, handwritten in the same cramped, precise hand as the outer address. No signature, no date. He read the 7 lines twice. Then he sat in his chair and looked at the wall for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and called Devlin. Get Reed, he said, and get Briggs. My office. 10 minutes. He put the USB drive on the desk in front of him and looked at it while he waited. The 7 lines on the paper said Hargrove has been running a structured fraud through Shell Properties for 11 years. The source properties trace back to a management company dissolved in 2019. The managing partner of that company, before dissolution, was a man named Robert Carter. He didn't know what he was part of. When he found out, he went quiet. He died 14 months later. His son found the records and went to clean it up. His son made a mistake. He trusted someone inside before the inside was secure. This drive has everything. Use it right. Robert Carter, Lena's father. Luther's investigation hadn't started with Hargrove. It had started with the realization that his father, their father, had been unwittingly used as a mechanism in Hargrove's fraud. That the property management company Robert Carter had run for years without understanding its true function had been the engine that moved money through shell vehicles and left a trail of losses behind it for real people. People who had trusted what looked like a legitimate operation because a legitimate man's name was on the letterhead. Luther had found this. Luther had gone after Hargrove not purely out of justice for the chapter members who'd lost money, but out of something more personal and more complicated. Out of the need to clear a dead man's name, his father's name, a name that Lena carried. Jack was still sitting with this when his door opened and Devlin came in, and then Reed, and then Briggs, and he looked at all three of them and said, "Luther sent this." The room went very quiet. "How do you know?" Devlin said. "Because only Luther knew all of this," Jack said, "and because the handwriting on that paper is left-handed. And Luther Hart is the only left-handed man I've known in this chapter in 20 years. He held up the paper. Devlin crossed to him and took it, read it, handed it to Reed without speaking. Reed read it. His face did things. He handed it to Briggs. Briggs read it faster. Looked up. "Luther's alive," Briggs said. "He sent this." "He's alive," Jack said, "and he's done." "Done with what?" "Done with whatever he was building," Jack said. "He wouldn't send this if he wasn't done. This is the handoff. He collected everything he needed, and now he's passing it to us to finish." "Why not come back himself?" Reed said. "Because he can't yet," Jack said, "or because something is still in motion that requires him to stay where he is." He looked at the USB drive. "Or because he knows that Victoria Voss has a PI on his sister, and the safest thing for Lena right now is for Luther to stay dark while we move." Devlin sat down heavily in the chair across from Jack's desk. "He's protecting her by staying away," Devlin said. "Yes," Jack said. The room held that, the weight of it, a man choosing absence as the act of love staying out of sight, so the attention stayed on him rather than on the sister he'd sent to the only people he trusted. "Does she know?" Briggs asked. "No," Jack said. "Are you going to tell her?" Jack looked at the drive. "Not yet," he said, "because when I tell her, she's going to want to act, and we need to move first." He picked up the drive. He plugged it into the laptop on his desk. The folder that opened had 47 files in it: financial records, correspondence, property transfer documents. A series of recorded phone calls, the quality variable, the content not. Shell company registrations. A spreadsheet that was 11 years of transactions cross-referenced against a public property database. Luther Hart had not just found something, he had built a case. "Briggs," Jack said, "you still have contact with that journalist at the Register?" "Yeah," Briggs said. "Not yet. I want a lawyer to see this first. Someone who knows financial fraud. Someone who isn't connected to Voss or anyone in Voss's orbit." "I know someone," Reed said. "Karen Marsh. She's handled cases like this before. She's clean." "Call her tonight," Jack said. "Tell her we have material in a civil fraud situation involving a named party. Don't say Hargrove yet. Just tell her the scope." Reed nodded. "And Hargrove himself," Devlin said. "He doesn't know we have this yet," Jack said. "And we keep it that way for as long as we can, because the moment he finds out this material is in someone else's hands, his lawyers are going to move, and they're going to move fast." "What about Victoria Voss?" Briggs said. Jack looked at him steadily. "Victoria Voss is the pressure valves," Jack said. "She filed that PI because she thought she had time. She thinks Lena is isolated and running out of money and eventually going to make a decision that Voss can use against her legally. She doesn't know what we know. She doesn't know Luther just handed us a weapon." He paused. "We move on Hargrove correctly and Voss's lever disappears entirely. Because what Voss is holding over Lena, the implication that her father was complicit in fraud goes away the moment the record shows Robert Carter was a victim, not a participant." The room was quiet. "Luther knew that," Devlin said softly. "He knew clearing Hargrove out would clear his father, and he knew that clearing his father would protect Lena." "Yes," Jack said. "He planned all of this. He planned it, and then he couldn't finish it alone," Reed said. "He finished his part," Jack said. "This drive is his part. He's asking us to finish ours. Claire. Lena felt a shift before she was told anything. She was good at reading rooms. She had always been good at reading rooms, which was a skill that came from having grown up in environments where the official story and the actual story were frequently different, and where knowing which was which had practical consequences. And the garage over the 3 weeks she had been in it had developed a specific texture that she knew well enough now to feel when it changed. It changed on Wednesday evening. Not the way a room changes when something dramatic has occurred. Subtly. In the way men carried themselves when they were holding something. The small adjustments of people who knew something and were being careful about it. She noticed Jack look at her twice during the hour after his office meeting. Brief looks, the kind you give someone when you are calculating how to say something. She finished Sandra's helmet that evening. The phoenix she had restored and reinterpreted from the ghost of the original design came out as something truer than a copy. It had the character of the original under it, but the perspective of someone who had not painted it from scratch, but had followed it back from damage, which gave it a quality of resilience that you couldn't fake. When you got close to it, you could see where the original lines ended and the new ones began, and the seam between them wasn't a flaw. It was the record of the thing surviving. She wrapped it carefully and left it on the table with Sandra's name on the cloth. She was putting her brushes away when Jack came and stood beside her. "I need to tell you something," he said. She turned, looked at him. "Luther sent us material," Jack said. "Information about Hargrove. A full case financial records documentation. Everything needed to move against him legally." Her hand stopped moving. "When?" she said. "Tonight. Came through a courier." Alive," Jack said. "We're certain. The handwriting is his." She pressed her mouth together for a moment. Pressed it together hard. Her eyes stayed dry, but they did significant work. "He's been building it all this time," she said. "Since he left." "Yes." "And he sent it to you." "Yes." "Because he knew you'd finish it correctly." "That's what we believe." She turned back to her brushes, picked one up, set it down. The movements of someone whose hands needed something to do while the rest of her processed. "The connection to my father," she said. "Is it in the material?" Jack hesitated for exactly 1 second. "Yes," he said. "Tell me." He told her. All of it. Robert Carter's management company, the shell properties, the way Hargrove had used a legitimate operation as a vehicle without the operator's knowledge, the way her father had found out and gone quiet and then died, the way Luther had found the records and understood what they meant. He told her evenly without softening it or dramatizing it, because she had not asked him to soften anything, and she had demonstrated consistently that she could receive hard information and remain standing. She received it. She stood with it. The line of her jaw did the work of someone absorbing something large. "He wasn't part of it," she said. Her voice was quiet and precise. "My father, he didn't know." "That's what the record shows," Jack said. "He was used. When he understood that, he tried to distance himself, and then he died." She closed her eyes for 2 seconds. When she opened them, something had settled in her face, not resolved, not healed, but settled the way sediment settles when the water stops being disturbed. "Luther was clearing his name," she said. "And yours," Jack said. "Because as long as the implication hung in the air that your father was complicit, Victoria Voss had something to use. She could paint a picture, daughter of a fraud participant, running from her responsibilities, falling in with criminal elements. It's a narrative, even if it's a false one. And false narratives work if no one contradicts them." Lena looked at him. "But if the record shows my father was a victim..." "The narrative collapses," Jack said, "and Voss's legal position with it." She was quiet for a moment. "You're moving against Hargrove," she said. "We're building the approach," he said. "Carefully, the right lawyer sees the material first. Then we decide how it gets used. And Voss doesn't know what we have," he said, "which means she's still operating on her original timeline. She thinks she has time." "She doesn't," Lena said. It wasn't a question. "No," Jack said. "She doesn't." Lena looked at her hands, the paint under her nails that never fully washed out, the calluses from the brushes, the specific marks of someone who had been making things for a long time. "He's been out there alone for 14 months, she said. "Doing this alone." "Yes." because he thought the people who could help him would be better positioned to help him if they weren't involved in the building, she said. He wanted clean hands on our side. That's what I think, Jack said. She looked at the helmet on the table. The phoenix, the bird that comes back. How long until you move, she said. Days, Jack said. Maybe a week. Reed is making a call tonight. She nodded. Okay, she said. Okay, he repeated. You should know what happens next is going to feel fast. When we move on Hargrove and the material goes to the right people, Victoria Voss is going to realize what's happened, and she's going to accelerate. She's going to try to file before we neutralize her position. What does that mean for me? Lena asked. It means you may be walking into a courtroom, Jack said, before this is over. She was quiet for a moment. I've been walking into rooms I wasn't supposed to be in for 14 months, she said. I think I know how to do that. Jack looked at her, and he thought about what Luther had said in the year before he left about a girl with their father's stubbornness and their mother's nerve. He thought about the fact that Luther had sent his sister here of all the places he could have sent her because he knew that this was where she would be safest and most herself. He thought about a man staying dark and silent and away from the person he loved most in the world because he knew the only way to protect her was to stay gone a little longer. What the road gives, Jack thought. It gives you the thing you can't have until you've paid for it completely. He picked up his jacket. Go get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow's going to start fast. She was already reaching for the helmet, picking it up, checking the finish one last time, the way she always did. The way someone does when they care about the thing being right more than they care about being finished. I know, she said. He left her there, and the gray sedan outside was still there, Coyle still sitting in it, still watching the door, still waiting for Lena Carter to make the mistake that Victoria Voss needed. He was going to wait a long time. Karen Marsh arrived at the garage at 7:30 Thursday morning, 40 minutes before most of the chapter showed up, which was exactly how Jack had arranged it. She was not what anyone who hadn't met her before would have expected. Not that anyone said so aloud, because the men who were present had enough self-awareness to know that expectations about what a financial fraud attorney looked like said more about the person holding the expectation than about the attorney. She was 51, compact with close-cropped gray hair and the specific quality of stillness that belongs to people who spend their professional lives in rooms where every word has consequences. She carried a single leather bag, and she set it on Jack's desk and opened it without ceremony. Reed had briefed her on the phone. She knew the broad shape of what she was walking into. Show me the drive, she said. Jack plugged it in. She sat down and she read. She did not speak while she read. She moved through the 47 files with the systematic efficiency of someone who had spent 20 years learning exactly what she was looking for in documents exactly like these, and she did not comment or react in ways that were visible from outside. Jack stood by the window. Reed sat in the corner. Devlin had positioned himself near the door, not blocking it, just present. 22 minutes in, she stopped on a specific file and went back to a previous file and cross-referenced them. She did this 3 times with 3 different file pairs. Then she sat back. This is real, she said. We know it's real, Jack said. I mean legally actionable real, she said. This isn't circumstantial. Whoever built this was meticulous. The property transfer chain is documented at every link. The shell company registrations cross-reference against the transfer dates in a way that would take a forensic accountant about 4 hours to confirm. The recorded calls have enough content to establish intent on Hargrove's part, not implied stated. She looked at Jack. Whoever put this together understood what prosecutors need. This isn't a tip. This is a case file. Can you use it? Jack said. I can take it to the DA's office this week, she said. With the right introduction, and I have the right introduction, they'll open a formal inquiry within 10 days. The material is clean enough that there's no question of source contamination. What about the people who lost money? Reed asked from the corner. Civil recovery is a parallel track, Marsh said. Criminal prosecution of Hargrove opens the door for civil suits by every affected party. If the DA moves, the civil attorneys follow. It's a lever you push the criminal side, and the civil side moves with it. How long does the whole thing take? Devlin asked. Criminal cases like this, 12 to 18 months to trial, assuming Hargrove doesn't take a deal, which he will because his lawyers will tell him to. Civil recovery is longer, but asset freezing can happen fast once the DA moves. If Hargrove tries to liquidate, the court can block it. She paused. This is the right way to do it. This is the way it actually lands. Jack looked at the drive in the laptop. Luther knew that, he said. That's why he built it this way. Marsh looked at him. The person who compiled this, are they available to testify? Possibly, Jack said, and that depends on factors we're still working through. She accepted that without pressing it. Then here's what I need from you, she said. A clean chain of custody for the drive. Documentation of how it came to you, courier, date time, anything you have. And I need 24 hours with the material before anything else moves. You'll have it, Jack said. She closed the laptop, stood up, picked up her bag. One more thing, she said, pausing at the door. I was told there's a family law attorney named Victoria Voss circling a related situation. Correct, Jack said. I know Victoria Voss, Marsh said, and her tone was the specific flat tone of someone choosing neutral language for a non-neutral feeling. She's competent, she's aggressive, and she doesn't move without a clear line of sight to what she wants. If she has a PI's watching someone connected to this material, she does, Jack said. Then she has more information than we'd like, Marsh said. She may not know what the material contains, but she knows something is moving. That means she's going to file sooner rather than later. Whatever petition she's building, assume it comes in the next 72 hours. The room held that. 72 hours, Reed said. If I'm reading her right, Marsh said, which I usually am. She left. The three men stood in Jack's office in the specific silence of people who have just had their timeline cut significantly shorter than they'd planned for. Devlin was the first to speak. We need to tell Lena, he said, all of it, today. I know, Jack said. And Luther, Devlin said, if there's any way to reach him. I've been trying since last night, Jack said. The number on the USB packaging is disconnected. Whatever channel he used to get this to us, it was one way. Reed stood up from the corner. So we move with what we have, he said. We move with what we have, Jack confirmed. Lena was at her work table when Jack came out. She had arrived at 6:45 earlier than any morning before, and she had the Castillo tank in front of her, the desert build, and she was doing the underpainting in a silence so complete that Briggs, who had been there since 6, had not said a single word to her in over an hour because the quality of the silence said clearly that interrupting it would be a mistake. Jack put his hand on the edge of the work table. She looked up. The attorney thinks of Voss files within 72 hours, he said. Lena set down the brush. What does filing mean practically, she said. It means a court date, he said. Probably emergency motion, she'll frame it as urgent. Vulnerable adult undue influence, something in that category. She'll argue that you're being kept here in circumstances that compromise your judgment. And I'd have to respond. You'd have to appear, Jack said, and respond yes. She absorbed this. What does she actually want, Lena said. Past the legal language, what does she want? Jack sat down in his usual chair. We think she wants access to whatever your father left, he said. Documentation records things that connect to Hargrove's operation, things that in the wrong hands could be used to muddy the case against him rather than support it. Lena went very still. She's connected to Hargrove, she said. It wasn't a question. We don't have direct proof of that yet, Jack said, but the logic of her behavior points that way. She has been watching you since before you came here. That means she knew about Luther's investigation before we did, or she knew enough to know that you were a pressure point in it. Lena looked at the tank in front of her, the underpainting, the ghost of the desert that was going to be there when the work was finished. She came to my father's funeral, Lena said quietly. Victoria. She came and she sat in the front row and she cried, and afterwards she pulled me aside and she said, your father left some things that need to be handled properly. I need you to trust me with that. And I was 16 and I didn't understand what she meant. And I said, okay. She stopped. I signed something that day. I didn't understand what I was signing. I thought it was a consent form for the estate. The room was completely quiet. What did you sign? Jack said. I don't know, she said. I've thought about it 100 times since. I was 16 and I was at my father's funeral, and she handed me a paper and a pen, and I signed it. She looked at Jack. Luther was there. He saw it happen. Afterward, he told me, don't worry about that paper. I'm going to deal with that paper. And then he didn't say any more about it. Jack sat with this. That paper, he said, Whatever it was, Luther knew about it, and he believed it needed to be dealt with. Yes, and dealing with it was part of what he went to do, Jack said. Lena looked at him. The drive, she said. The 47 files. Is there anything in it about a document from my father's estate, something with my signature on it? Jack had not looked for that specifically. He stood up. I'm going to check, he said. He went back to his office. He went back into the drive. He searched for anything that referenced estate documents or consent forms or signatures against Lena's name or a date near her father's death. He found it in the 31st file. It was a scanned document, 2 pages. It had Lena's signature at the bottom. It had a notary stamp, and it was not a consent form for an estate. It was a power of attorney, limited in scope, buried in language that a 16-year-old would not have been able to parse without legal training, granting Victoria Voss the authority to act on Lena's behalf in matters related to her father's estate and business affairs, including the authority to access, review, and where necessary manage documentation held in her father's name. Luther had found it. Luther had scanned it and included it in the case file. And in the margin of the scan, in his cramped left-handed writing, he had added 4 words: coerced, minor, void, C. Marsh. He had known about Karen Marsh, or he had researched her. He had built the referral into the material. He had anticipated that whoever received this drive would need legal guidance, and he had pointed toward the right person. Jack sat back. Luther Hart had not built a case. He had built a roadmap. Every turn anticipated. Every obstacle accounted for. The man had spent 14 months in the dark alone assembling something so thorough that the people who came after him would not have to improvise. They would only have to follow. Jack called Marsh. She picked up on the second ring. File 31, he said, a pause. He heard her moving the sound of a bag, a zipper. I'll pull it up, she said. He waited. 30 seconds. I see it, she said. The margin note, he said. I see it, she said again. Her voice had shifted, the specific shift of someone who has just had a missing piece drop into place. This changes the Voss situation entirely. How? Jack said. Because if Voss's legal standing with respect to Lena is based on this document, this power of attorney, and this document was signed by a minor, under circumstances that could be characterized as coercive, then the document is void. And if the document is void, Voss has no legal authority over anything connected to Lena or her father's estate. Her petition doesn't just fail, it fails, and it exposes her to sanctions for filing based on fraudulent standing. Jack closed his eyes for 1 second. Can you establish that the circumstances were coercive? He said. A 16-year-old at her father's funeral, Marsh said, signing a legal document she didn't understand, handed to her by an adult family member who was also an attorney. Yes, I can establish that. How fast? I need to file a preemptive motion, she said. Today, I need to get in front of a judge before Voss does. If I can establish the void document argument first, Voss's emergency petition has no foundation the moment she files it. What do you need from me? Jack said. Lena, Marsh said, I need to talk to her in the next 2 hours. I need her account of what happened at that funeral. And I need her not to be afraid of the room she's going to be standing in. She's not afraid of rooms, Jack said. A brief pause. Good, Marsh said. Send me her number. So, Lena sat across from Karen Marsh at a diner 2 blocks from the garage, Marsh's choice of location, which Jack had accepted because Marsh had good instincts about where conversations of this kind should happen, and it was not in a biker garage. Briggs drove them. He sat at the counter with a cup of coffee and his back to the room and did not look in their direction once, which was his version of giving them privacy. Marsh was direct. She did not warm up to the subject. She had Lena walk her through the funeral day in sequence, the morning, the service, the reception afterward, the specific moment when Victoria Voss had pulled her aside, the paper, the pen, the signature. Lena told it without embellishment. She was good at that, at recounting things with the precision of someone who had trained herself to observe accurately, because accuracy had always mattered more than the comfort of a simplified version. She said it was for the estate, Lena said. She said your father left some things that need to be handled, and I need your authorization to handle them appropriately. She said it was standard. She used the word standard, Marsh said. Yes. Did she explain what you were signing? No, she said, it's just paperwork, sweetheart. Standard estate paperwork. Lena's jaw tightened slightly at the word sweetheart, the memory of it apparently still carrying something she didn't enjoy. She had the paper already prepared. The notary was right there, a woman who'd come with Victoria. The whole thing took maybe 90 seconds. You were 16, Marsh said. 16 and 2 months, Lena said. And my father had been buried 3 hours before. Marsh wrote something on her notepad. Did anyone witness this exchange, she said. Luther was across the room, Lena said. He saw Victoria pull me aside. He saw me sign. He came over afterward. Victoria had already walked away. And he looked at me and said, "What did she give you?" And I said, "I didn't know it was estate paperwork." And he said, "Did you keep a copy?" And I said, "No." She paused. He got very quiet. And then he said, "Don't worry about it. I'll handle it." And he did handle it, Marsh said more to herself than to Lena. He found a copy, Lena said. Somewhere. He put it in the drive. Marsh looked at her notepad. "Lena," she said, "Oh yeah, I want to be direct with you about what I'm going to do and what it means. I'm going to file a motion today that challenges the validity of that power of attorney. I'm going to argue that it was obtained under coercive circumstances from a minor who lacked the legal capacity to grant what was being requested. If the judge agrees with me, and I believe a judge will agree with me, Victoria Voss loses any legal standing she has with respect to you or your father's affairs." And her petition, Lena said, "If she files it, it falls apart on its own foundation," Marsh said. "She has no legal authority to bring that petition because the document that granted her that authority is void." Lena was quiet for a moment. "What if she files before you can get in front of a judge?" she said. "I'm filing in 4 hours," Marsh said. "She was going to file in 72. I'm cutting that margin to almost nothing. And I know which clerk to call." Something about the way she said it, the precise confidence of a person who had been in this specific kind of race before and had learned where the shortcuts were made, Lena feel for the first time in 72 hours, like the ground under her was something other than temporary. "Okay," Lena said. "There's one more thing," Marsh said. She set down her pen. "The motion I file is going to name the power of attorney and its circumstances. It's going to become a court document, which means Victoria Voss is going to see it the moment it's filed. She'll know we have it," Lena said. "Yes, and she'll know that we know what she was trying to do." "Yes," Marsh said, "and she will react, quickly and not pleasantly. You should be ready for that." Lena looked at her coffee cup. "I've been ready for that for 14 months, she said. Marsh picked up her pen. "Then let's go," she said. The motion was filed at 2:17 in the afternoon. By 3:40, Victoria Voss knew about it. Briggs tracked this through a contact who had visibility into the county court filing system. The motion appeared, and 11 minutes later, Voss's office made 3 rapid phone calls, which the contact could identify as incoming to the court clerk's office from Voss's registered number. She was checking how fast it had moved. She was calculating how much time she had. Jack got this information at 4:15. He was in the main bay, and he stood with his phone in his hand for a moment before he put it in his pocket and looked at the room around him. There were 60-some men in the garage that afternoon, which was a higher than average Thursday count. He had not asked anyone to be here. He had not sent messages or made calls. But the chapter moved on information the way water moves on a slope. It finds its direction without being told. And by mid-afternoon, a significant number of men had found reasons to be somewhere close to the situation rather than somewhere else. Devlin was at his usual spot. Reed was near the door. Garrison had come in from his own shop 2 miles away and was doing nothing particularly visible, just being present in the specific way that a man of his chapter tenure was present when something mattered. Even Tommy Briggs had quieted down. He was sitting on a workbench, not talking, which for Briggs was approximately the equivalent of another person holding a vigil. Jack walked to where Lena was working. She was back on Castillo's tank, the desert build. She had moved past the underpainting and into the primary color work, the golds and dusty reds of the late afternoon southwest sky materializing under her brush in the way that things she made materialized, which was as if they had always been there, and she was simply finding them. She did not look up when he stopped beside her. "Voss knows," she said. "How did you—" "Your footsteps," she said. "You walk differently when something's changed." He sat down. "She knows the motion was filed," he said. "She's going to move fast now. We forced her hand." Lena kept working. The brush moved steadily. "What does fast look like?" she said. She'll try to file her petition before the court can rule on Marcia's motion, Jack said. Race the timeline. If she can get her petition in front of a different judge before Marcia's motion is heard, she gets a second path. Can she do that? She can try, Jack said. Marcia's already working to get an expedited hearing on her motion. The question is which one moves first. Lena was quiet for a moment. The brush didn't stop. What do we do while we wait? She said. We stay ready, Jack said. And we don't give Coyle anything useful. He's still out there. I know, she said. I've known where he parks for a week. Jack looked at her. And you didn't. You told me not to give him anything, she said. So I didn't. I go to the garage. I come back to Devlin's. I paint. I give him nothing to photograph except a girl going about her life. She paused. Is that what you needed? Yes, Jack said. That's exactly what I needed. She stopped painting. She turned to look at him directly. Jack, she said, when this is over, when Marsh moves and Voss's petition fails and Hargrove goes to the D, is there going to be a moment where the chapter decides what to do about my being here? Officially. He met her eyes. There's already been that conversation, he said. And Ishika. And the conversation went the way it went, he said. You're here, you work, you're straight with us, and you're Luther's. He paused. 3 out of 3 is enough. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she turned back to the tank. Okay, she said. But before she picked up the brush again, she said quietly, not looking at him, just saying it to the space in front of her. He's going to come back. When this is done, he's going to come back. It was not a question. It was the kind of statement that a person makes when they need to put something into words because the words make it more real, because saying a thing aloud is an act of commitment to it. Yes, Jack said. He is. He meant it. And she heard that he meant it, and she picked up the brush, and she kept working. The call came at 7:49 that evening. Jack's phone, unknown number. He answered it on the second ring. Jack. The voice was low and direct and immediately recognizable, even after 14 months of silence. Jack stood completely still. Luther, he said. The garage did not erupt. The men nearby heard the name, and the noise level in their immediate vicinity dropped, and then the drop moved outward like a wave. And within 20 seconds, the main bay was nearly silent, which in a space that size and with that many people in it was an extraordinary thing. I got your signal, Luther said. The motion filing Marsh's motion, I have a contact at the court. When that hit the system, I knew you'd gotten the drive. We got it, Jack said, 3 days ago. Voss is moving her, Luther said. We know, Marsh is ahead of her, barely. I have something else, Luther said. Something that wasn't on the drive because I didn't have it when I sent the drive. I have it now. What is it, Wow? Jack said. A direct communication, Luther said, between Victoria Voss and Gerald Hargrove, dated 8 months ago. It establishes that Voss was acting as Hargrove's inside contact, that she had been feeding him information about my investigation in exchange for a financial arrangement. A pause. It's recorded, full conversation. Voss's voice is clearly identifiable. The room was completely silent now. Jack turned and looked at Lena without meaning to, the instinctive turn of a man who has just heard something that changes the shape of someone else's entire understanding of their life. Lena had stopped painting. She was looking at him. Victoria Voss wasn't just trying to control Lena, Jack said. She was working for Hargrove. She was always working for Hargrove, Luther said, since before my father died. She wasn't a grieving family member at that funeral, Jack. She was there to recover documents she knew my father had. The power of attorney was her mechanism for accessing them legally. When she couldn't find them because I'd already moved them, she pivoted to surveillance. And when Lena showed up at the garage, Voss panicked. Jack closed his eyes for 1 second. Because Lena showing up here meant you had sent her here, Jack said, which meant you trusted the chapter, which meant you were about to move. Yes, Luther said. The silence in the garage was absolute. Jack opened his eyes. He looked at Lena across the room. She was watching him with the gray eyes that had assessed everything without broadcasting anything since the first afternoon she'd walked through the door. She knew something significant had just happened. She didn't know what. She was waiting. Luther, Jack said, she's here. Right now, she's 6 feet from me. A silence on the line. Then Luther said quietly, and in his voice there was something that had not been in it a moment before, something that all the professionalism and all the deliberateness could not entirely contain, "Can I talk to her?" Jack walked to Lena. He held out the phone. "It's your brother," he said. She took the phone. Her hand was absolutely steady. Her face was not. She pressed the phone to her ear. "Luther," she said, just the one word. And then she stopped because there was nothing else to say and everything else to say simultaneously, and the two conditions canceled each other out and left only his name in the air. His voice came back to her from whatever dark and distant place he was calling from, and it said the same thing back. Lena. And that was where they started. The garage held its breath around them. 240 men who had spent 20 years learning not to feel things publicly stood in a room and did not move and did not speak, while a girl who had walked through their door 23 days ago carrying her brother's words on a sketchbook page held a phone to her ear and heard her brother's voice for the first time in 6 months. And outside, Raymond Coyle sat in his gray sedan with his camera and his notepad and his careful record of a girl's movements, and he had no way of knowing that the ground underneath everything he was documenting had just shifted completely. Victoria Voss was going to find out very soon, and Gerald Hargrove was going to find out right after that. Luther talked for 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Lena knew the exact duration because she counted. Not deliberately, it was the automatic counting of someone whose nervous system had learned to track time during phone calls with him, because phone calls with Luther were always finite in ways that regular conversations weren't always subject to ending without warning. And so she had trained herself to register each minute the way you register each mile of fuel when you're not sure how far the tank goes. 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Then he said, "I have to go. I'll be in touch through Jack when it's safe." And she said, "Okay." And he said, "You did good, Lena. Walking in there. You did exactly right." And she said, "I know." And he made a sound that was almost a laugh, and the line went quiet. She held the phone for a moment after the call ended, held it the way you hold something that was warm and is now cooling, aware of the transition, not ready to set it down. Then she turned and handed it back to Jack. "He's in Arizona," she said. "He can't say where exactly. He says he'll move in the next 48 hours. "Move how?" Jack said. "He didn't say." She looked at the phone in his hand. "But he said 48 hours. He said by the time of the court moves, he'll be positioned." Jack turned the phone over once, put it in his pocket. The garage around them was reanimating slowly the way a room does when it's been holding a collective breath and finally releases it. Men who had stopped what they were doing started moving again. Conversations resumed at lower volumes than before. The ambient noise rebuilt itself carefully the way you approach something fragile. Devlin came and stood beside Jack. "He's coming back," Devlin said. "Not a question." "In 48 hours, Jack said. Devlin looked at Lena. She was already turning back to the Castillo tank. She had picked up her brush. She was working again, and the working was the same as it always was, contained, precise, fully present, but there was something different in it now that Devlin couldn't entirely name. Something settled. The difference between a person painting, because it's the only solid thing in an uncertain world, and a person painting because the world has become, in the last 4 minutes and 30 seconds, a little more solid on its own. "She's going to be all right," Devlin said. "She was already all right," Jack said. "She just didn't have her footing yet." Devlin considered this. "She's got it now," he said. "Yes," Jack said. "She does." Karen Marsh called at 9:40 that evening. Jack was still at the garage. Most of the chapter was still at the garage, which said everything without saying anything. "The hearing is set," Marsh said. "Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., Judge Patricia Okafor. She's sharp, she's fast, and she doesn't have patience for procedural games. I got expedited because I argued imminent harm to a young adult based on a fraudulent legal instrument." "And Voss," Jack said, "filed her petition at 6:17 this evening," Marsh said. "I expected it. She filed fast and she filed aggressive, undue influence, vulnerability, the whole package. She's trying to get Okafor to hear both motions together tomorrow." "Is that good or bad?" Jack said. "It's good," Marsh said, "because it means the void power of attorney is the first thing on the table. Okafor rules on that first. Voss's entire petition loses its legal foundation in the same hearing. Voss knows this, which is why she structured the petition the way she did. She's trying to bury the POA argument inside a larger proceeding and hope that Okafor doesn't focus on it until she's established the broader framework." "Will it work?" Jack said. "Not with me in the room," Marsh said. She paused. I also need to tell you something about the recording Luther mentioned, the Voss-Hargrove communication. Yes, Jack said. I need it filed as supporting evidence by 8 a.m. tomorrow, she said. Luther has to transmit it through a verifiable channel, not a USB drive through a courier this time. It needs a chain of custody that will hold up when Voss's attorneys challenge it. Can he do that? Jack thought about the 48 hours, about Luther in Arizona positioned waiting. I'll get it done, he said. By 8 a.m., Jack. I heard you, he said. He hung up. He turned to Reed, who had been standing 6 feet away in the specific posture of a man who has been listening and waiting to be useful. I need to reach Luther, Jack said. Tonight. Do you still have the contact in the Southwest? Yes, Reed said. Use it. Tell Luther we need the recording through a verifiable channel. Certified email to Marsh's office. He needs to send it before midnight at Arizona time. Reed had his phone out before Jack finished the sentence. Jack turned to find Lena already looking at him from across the work table. Tomorrow at 10, she said. Dad. Yes. I'm going to need clothes, she said. I have jeans and paint shirts. For one moment, one brief human moment, Jack Rourke almost smiled in a way that was fully visible. Sandra, he said to no one in particular, but loudly enough to Carrie. Sandra Reeves, who had come back to the garage that evening to collect the Phoenix helmet and had stayed when she understood the shape of the night, appeared from near the door. The girl needs something to wear to court tomorrow, Jack said. Sandra looked at Lena, assessed. The same efficient assessment as the first meeting, but warmer now, the warmth of someone who has made a judgment and found it confirmed. What size? Sandra said. 4, Lena said. Maybe 6 in the top. Come with me, Sandra said. They left together. Jack watched them go. He thought that Luther, wherever he was in the Arizona dark, would have found something to say about the specific image of his 18-year-old sister walking out of a Hells Angels garage with a chapter wife going to find her something appropriate to wear to the hearing that was going to end Victoria Voss's long reach into their family. Something wry, something precise, something that landed. Jack went back to work. Luther's recording arrived in Karen Marsh's inbox at 11:51 p.m. He had sent it through an encrypted legal document service with a time-stamped verification chain and a cover note. 3 sentences signed with his full name and his state ID number that established his identity, his relationship to the material, and his willingness to testify to its authenticity in person. Marsh forwarded the confirmation to Jack at 12:04 a.m. Jack read it, standing in the empty garage. Everyone else had finally gone home or gone to whatever approximation of home they maintained, and he put his phone in his pocket and stood for a moment in the quiet. He looked at the Castillo tank on the work table. Lena hadn't finished it tonight. She'd gotten 2/3 through the primary color work and stopped cleaned her brushes with the methodical care she always used and left with Sandra at 10:30. The tank sat where she'd left it. The desert was half finished. The long highway receding toward the horizon was fully rendered. The sky above it was complete. What remained was the figure in the distance, the thing Jack had described to her as not a figure, not a landmark, just an impression of something waiting. She'd left it for tomorrow. He thought that was probably deliberate. He turned off the lights and locked up and drove home for the first time in 2 days. The morning came fast, the way mornings do when you haven't slept enough to deserve them. Lena was at the garage by 7:15. She was wearing the clothes Sandra had found, dark slacks, a white blouse, a simple dark blazer that was close enough to her size to look intentional. Her hair was down, which she almost never wore it, and it changed the look of her face in a way that was harder to categorize, made her seem simultaneously younger and older, which was probably accurate. She sat at the work table. She did not pick up a brush. She sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the Castillo tank and the unfinished distance, and she breathed slowly. Men arrived. They did not speak to her directly, but they moved around her with a specific quality of attention, the way you move around someone before something important, not hovering, not crowding, but present. Garrison came and stood at his workbench and did something with a set of tools that did not require his full focus. Reed stood near the door. Briggs arrived and sat on his usual workbench and was for the 3rd consecutive day unusually quiet. Devlin brought her coffee. He set it on the table without comment. She looked up at him. Thank you, she said. He nodded, started to walk away. Devlin, she said. He stopped. He talked about you, she said. Luther. On the phone last night, he said Devlin was the first person who treated me like I already belonged before I'd proven I did. Devlin stood with that for a moment. His face did careful, controlled work. He was easy to do that for, Devlin said finally. He showed up ready. So did I, Lena said. Not with pride, with simple accuracy. Devlin looked at her. Yes, he said. You did. He walked away. She drank the coffee. At 8:45, Jack came out of his office in a clean shirt, Jack Rourke's version of dressing for a significant occasion, which meant the shirt had no visible stains, and he'd run a comb through his hair, and he looked at Lena and said, "Ready?" "Yes," she said. She stood up. She picked up the blazer from the chair back. Tommy Briggs slid off his workbench. "We're coming," he said. Jack looked at him. "I didn't ask." "I know you didn't," Briggs said. "We're still coming." Jack looked around the room. Garrison had already picked up his jacket. Reed was at the door. Devlin was standing with his arms at his sides, which was Devlin's posture of readiness. Jack looked at Lena. She said nothing. But something moved across her face, the brief passage of an emotion she didn't name and didn't need to. "All right," Jack said. "Let's go. Peace." They arrived at the county courthouse at 9:22, not 240. The garage couldn't close entirely. Machines still needed tending. Other obligations existed. The chapter's world did not pause for any single event, regardless of its weight. But 61 men found their way to the courthouse steps by 10 o'clock, arriving in ones and twos in small groups, parking wherever they found space, walking up without formation or coordination, assembling on the broad front steps, the way a crowd assembles when it has arrived at the same destination from the same instinct. They were not loud. They were not demonstrative. They wore what they wore, leather vests, jeans, boots, the patches that identified them, and they stood. Lena saw them when she came out of the brief pre-hearing conference with Marsh and Jack in the lobby. She came through the glass doors onto the steps and stopped. 61 men standing on a courthouse steps in the morning sun, not performing anything, not making a statement for the cameras that weren't there, not coordinating their presence for effect, just standing. Because a girl who had painted their bikes and carried their absent brother's words was about to walk into a courtroom, and standing was the thing they knew how to do. She stood on the top step and looked at them for a moment. Tommy Briggs was in the front. He met her eyes and gave her the smallest possible nod, the nod of a 26-year-old man who is trying very hard to communicate gravity and landing it better than he expected. She turned before she started crying, because she had decided she was not going to cry before she went into this room, and she meant it, and she walked back through the glass doors and down the hall toward courtroom 4. Marsh was already at the plaintiff's table. She had the motion documents arranged with the precision of someone who has laid out the tools of a surgical procedure. She looked up when Lena sat beside her. "Voss is already inside," Marsh said quietly. She brought 2 associates. "Don't look at her. Don't react to anything she does. You don't acknowledge she exists until I tell you to." "Okay," Lena said. "When the judge asks you to speak, you speak clearly. You speak only to answer what's asked, and you tell the truth in the plainest possible language. No elaboration, no emotion you don't actually feel, no performing." "I don't perform," Lena said. Marsh looked at her. "I know," she said. "I've been noticing that." Judge Patricia Okafor entered at 10:03. She was 60, direct, with reading glasses on a chain, and the demeanor of someone who has been presented with every variety of legal maneuver in 23 years on the bench, and finds most of them mildly tedious. She sat. She looked at the documents in front of her. She looked at both tables. "Miss Marsh," she said, "your motion challenges the validity of a power of attorney signed in 2021. Walk me through it." Marsh walked her through it. She was clear, she was fast, she did not editorialize. She laid out the document, the circumstances of its signing, the age of the signatory, the context, and the legal basis for voiding it. She cited 3 precedents. She presented the scanned document with Luther's margin notation as an exhibit. She presented Lena's account of the funeral afternoon as a sworn statement. It took 11 minutes. Judge Okafor looked at the documents. She looked at Voss's table. "Ms. Voss," she said. Response. Victoria Voss stood. She was exactly as composed as her website photograph suggested: suit, immaculate posture, controlled voice level. She argued that the power of attorney had been executed voluntarily, that a notary had been present, that the signatory, regardless of age, had demonstrated understanding of the document by her signature. She spoke for 8 minutes. Judge Okafor listened without visible reaction. Then she said, "The young woman who signed this document, is she present?" "Yes, Your Honor," Marsh said. "Lena Carter." "Ms. Carter," the judge said, "I have your sworn statement. I'd like to ask you directly, when you signed this document, did you read it?" Lena stood. "Oh, no, Your Honor," she said. "It was handed to me at my father's graveside reception. I was 16. Miss Voss told me it was standard estate paperwork. She had the notary there with her. The whole exchange took less than 2 minutes." "Did you understand what you were signing?" "No," Lena said. "I understood that I was signing something my aunt told me I needed to sign. I didn't understand that I was granting her legal authority over my father's affairs or over anything connected to me." "When did you understand what the document actually was?" "3 days ago," Lena said, "when an attorney showed me the scan of it." Okafor wrote something. "And you didn't seek to act on this power of attorney until recently, Ms. Voss," the judge said, without looking up from her writing. "Your Honor," Voss said, "the circumstances only recently became—" "The circumstances," Okafor said, still writing, "became relevant when Ms. Carter came into contact with individuals whose association you wish to leverage in a custody petition." "Is that accurate?" A beat of silence. "Your Honor, the petition was filed out of genuine concern for—" "Ms. Voss," Okafor said, setting down her pen and looking directly at her, "I have your petition in front of me. I also have, as of this morning, a certified evidentiary record that includes a recorded communication between yourself and a Mr. Gerald Hargrove, dated approximately 8 months ago. This communication has been submitted as supplementary evidence by Ms. Marsh, and I have had the opportunity to review its contents this morning." She paused. "Do you wish to respond to the existence of that recording before I rule on the motion?" The silence that followed was the kind that happens when a room's entire atmosphere changes in a single moment. Victoria Voss's composure held for approximately 4 seconds. Then something underneath it shifted, not dramatically, not visibly to anyone who wasn't watching very closely, but Lena was watching very closely, and she saw it. The controlled surface of a person who has built a professional life on the maintenance of that surface, encountering something she had not prepared for because she had not known it existed. Voss started, stopped. Her lead associate touched her arm and leaned in and said something very quietly. Voss listened, straightened. "Your Honor," she said, "I would request a brief recess to confer with counsel regarding that submission." "Motion denied," Okafor said, not the recess she was ruling on, the POA motion, and she said it with the clean efficiency of someone whose mind had been made up for the past 4 minutes. The power of attorney in question was signed by a minor under circumstances that do not meet the standard for informed consent. The document is void as of the date of this ruling. Ms. Voss, your petition for guardianship and oversight authority rests on this document as its primary legal basis. Without that foundation, the petition has no standing. She looked at Voss directly. Petition dismissed. She picked up her pen. Furthermore, she said, given the nature of the supplementary evidence submitted this morning, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for review of potential misconduct. She looked at both tables. We're adjourned. She stood. The bailiff called the room to rise, and it was over. Not dramatically, no gasp, no outcry, no moment of theatrical triumph, just a judge standing up and a gavel and a door opening and the fluorescent hum of a courthouse hallway waiting on the other side. Lena stood at the plaintiff's table and breathed. Marsh was already packing her documents with the efficient calm of someone who had expected this outcome and was therefore not performing relief because she had not allowed herself to feel the anxiety that relief requires. That's it, Lena said. That's it, Marsh said. It felt anticlimactic, Marsh said. Good law usually does. The drama is in the preparation. The ruling is just the result. She looked at Lena. You did well. Exactly what I asked. Lena looked at the table in front of her, the empty surface where the documents had been, the clean wood grain. She's going to face consequences, she said. Victoria, beyond just the petition failing. The DA referral is serious, Marsh said. Combined with what I'm taking to the DA this week on the Hargrove material, her connection to him is going to be very thoroughly examined. She paused. This isn't over for her. It's just beginning, actually. Lena nodded. She picked up the blazer from the chair back and walked to the door and pushed through it into the hallway. Jack was waiting. He was standing against the opposite wall with his arms crossed, and he looked at her when she came out, and she gave him one nod, and he returned it, and that was the whole conversation because it was the only conversation necessary. Then she walked down the hall and through the lobby and pushed through the glass doors and stood on the top step in the morning sun. 61 men looked up at her. She looked back at them. Nobody cheered, nobody rushed forward or made the kinds of sounds that belong to movie victories. The men who were there that morning were not movie characters, and they had not come for a performance. They had come because someone they decided to stand for was going inside a building to handle something that needed handling. And standing outside while she did it was the most honest thing available to them. She stood at the top of the steps, and the sun was on her, and the morning was warm, and the 61 men stood below her in the ordinary light of an ordinary Thursday, and she felt with a clarity that was almost physical the difference between a person who has been running and a person who has stopped. Tommy Briggs finally said something. "So," he said, "petition dismissed," she said. Briggs said a word that was not appropriate for the courthouse steps and that several of the older men chose to overlook on the grounds of context. Devlin smiled. Reed turned away to compose himself. Garrison made a sound that was technically a cough. Jack descended the steps and came and stood beside her and looked out at the street and said nothing, and she stood beside him and also said nothing, and the two of them stood in the sun together while the men around them gradually dissolved back toward their vehicles and the morning moved forward without making a ceremony of itself. She finished the Castillo tank that afternoon. She went back to the garage after the courthouse still wearing Sandra's blazer, which she didn't bother changing out of, and she sat down in front of the tank and she picked up her brush and she finished it. The figure in the distance. The thing Jack had described as not a figure, not a landmark, just an impression of something waiting. She painted it the way she understood it now, which was different from how she would have understood it 3 weeks ago. She painted it as the place the road was going toward, not a destination, not an arrival, but a direction. The thing that makes a road mean something rather than just being a stretch of ground that continues. The presence in the distance that tells you the traveling has a purpose even when you can't see what the purpose is. It took 40 minutes. She set down the brush. She stepped back. Castillo himself had come in around 2 o'clock. A man in his early 50s with 20 years of chapter history on him and the physical bearing of someone who had been through enough of life to carry it without showing the strain. He had stood off to the side and watched the last portion of the work without speaking, and she had not acknowledged him because she had learned in 3 weeks that this was the right thing to do, that the men here respected work that was allowed to finish on its own terms. He came and stood in front of the tank when she stepped back. He looked at it for a long time. She waited. "That figure," he said finally, "in the distance." "Yes," she said. "How did you know what to put there?" Jack described it as something waiting, she said. "I painted the thing that makes the waiting worthwhile." Castillo looked at the tank for another moment. "What is it?" he said. "Whatever it is for you," she said. "I left it general enough that it could be." He turned and looked at her. His expression was doing the careful internal work of a man who has felt something unexpected and is deciding what to do with it. "What does it look like to you," he said, "when you look at it?" She considered. "It looks like arrival," she said, "the moment before but certain. You don't know what you're arriving at yet, but you know you're arriving." He was quiet. 20 years, he said. "I've been writing 20 years, and I never had a way to say that." He looked back at the tank. "You just said it." He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. He walked to Jack's office, and they settled the business side of it, and she cleaned her brushes, and the afternoon ran on. Luther came back on a Friday. Not announced, not organized. He pulled up on a bike that had seen significant miles in the last 14 months, and he parked it outside the garage, and he walked through the door at 2 in the afternoon on a clear fall day, and the chapter felt him before most of them saw him, the way the chapter had always felt Luther Hart, the temperature change effect, the specific alteration of the atmosphere when he was present. He stopped just inside the door. He had a beard he hadn't had before, and his jacket was more worn, and he had lost some weight in the way that people lose weight when they have been working too hard and sleeping too little. But he was standing straight, and his eyes were clear, and he was unmistakably entirely himself. He looked around the room. He found Devlin. He found Reed. He found Jack, who was coming out of the office already moving fast and not hiding it. They didn't hug Jack, and Luther had never been huggers, but Jack gripped his shoulder and Luther gripped his arm, and they stood like that for a moment in the shorthand of men who have known each other a long time and have been worried about each other and are unwilling to say so directly. "You look like hell," Jack said. "I know," Luther said. "You're here," Jack said. "I'm here," Luther said. Then his eyes moved. Scanning. The particular scan of someone looking for one specific thing and not pretending otherwise. She was at her work table. She had heard the door, but she had not turned because she had told herself she was not going to turn until she was certain. And then she was certain in the way that operates below logic, the body knowing, before the mind catches up, and she turned. He was already looking at her. The distance between them was maybe 30 feet. He crossed it in the time it takes to cross 30 feet, and she stayed where she was, and then he was there, and she was standing up, and he pulled her in with the specific force of a man who has been holding something at arm's length for 14 months and has finally completely let go of the distance. She held on. Around them, the room did what rooms do. It kept moving, kept working. Let the moment exist inside the ordinary instead of stopping the ordinary to make room for it, which was the right way, the only respectful way to treat something that private in a space that public. He held her for a long time. When they finally separated, she looked at him and said, "You look terrible." "I know," he said. "Are you okay?" "Yes," he said. "Are you, She thought about the 26 days, the sketchbook, the tank, Devlin's spare room, Sandra and the Phoenix helmet, the courthouse steps, 61 men standing in the morning sun. "Yes," she said. "Actually, yes." He looked at her, really looked at her the way you look at someone when you are checking not just their face, but the thing behind their face, the condition of the person inside all the circumstances. "You found your footing," he said. "I found somewhere to stand," she corrected. "There's a difference." He smiled, and it was exactly the smile she had described to Jack from the photograph, the closed, genuine, private smile that he almost initially never directed at anyone outside a very small circle. "Yeah," he said. "There is." Where? The DA opened a formal investigation into Gerald Hargrove 17 days after the courthouse hearing. Karen Marsh presented the case file, all 47 documents, the recorded calls, the verified financial records to the district attorney's office on a Tuesday morning, and by Thursday the investigation was open and Hargrove's attorneys had been notified and his accounts were under preliminary review. It would take time. These things always did. The road between an opened investigation and a concluded one was long and full of legal terrain that required patience and precision to navigate. Marsh had told Jack this before she filed anything, and Jack had told Lena, and Lena had told Luther, and Luther had said, "I know. I built it to last, not to be fast. Build it fast, and it falls apart in court. Build it right, and it holds." Victoria Voss was the faster case, which was its own kind of justice. The DA's office, once they understood the shape of her relationship with Hargrove and the mechanism of the fraudulent power of attorney, moved on her in parallel with the Hargrove investigation. Her law license was suspended pending review within 30 days of the courthouse hearing. The specific efficiency of that outcome was not lost on anyone who had watched her walk into that courtroom expecting to win. The chapter members who had lost money in Hargrove's operation, the ones Luther had felt responsible for, whose losses had set him on the road 14 months ago, would see civil recovery eventually. Not all of it. These things never came back whole. But enough to matter. Enough to mean that the road Luther had walked had ended somewhere real. Raymond Coyle, the private investigator, had quietly packed up his gray sedan and departed from the street outside the garage on the morning of the courthouse hearing, which was either the professional judgment of a man who knew when a job had become unwinnable or something someone had said to him. No one in the chapter confirmed which. The night Luther came back after the chapter had given them time, and the time had been used, and the garage had settled into its evening rhythm. Lena went back to her work table and she picked up a brush. Luther sat in the folding chair 6 feet away. The same chair, the same distance. He watched her work. "What are you painting?" he said. "Nothing yet," she said. "I'm deciding." "What are your options?" She looked at the blank tank surface in front of her. "There are always options," she said. "You look at the surface and you see everything it could be, And then you figure out what it actually wants to be, what the material is asking for. He was quiet for a moment. And this one, he said. She tilted her head, looked at the blank metal, looked at it the way she always looked at blank surfaces, with attention that was also patience, that understood the waiting as part of the work rather than the thing that came before the work. Something about beginning, she said finally. Something about the first mile. He said nothing, but he settled back into the chair the way you settle when you're not going anywhere. She put brush to metal. The first line she drew was long and certain, continuous from start to finish, no hesitation, no correction. A line that implied the whole form before the rest of the marks appeared. Jack Rourke, coming through the main bay on his way to the supply room, stopped when he saw them. Stopped and looked the girl at the table, the brother in the chair, the fresh line on the blank tank, the beginning of something. He did not say anything. He did not interrupt. He watched for 3 seconds. Then he walked on because the work was happening, and the work didn't need witnesses, just space to be itself. And in the garage on Caldwell Street, with the ventilation hum overhead and the smell of oil and metal, in the particular evening quiet of a place that works hard and rests honestly, Lena Carter painted. She was not running from anything. She was not waiting for anything. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was built to do with the people who had chosen her and whom she had chosen back. And the road that had given her everything it had given her had brought her finally and completely, and without question, home.